call it the graveyard shift for a reason. Usually it's just a name, a way to describe the hours where the world goes quiet, and the only people awake are the ones with something to hide or nowhere to go. I've been driving this taxi for 12 years. I thought I'd seen every shade of the night. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday, around 2:45 a.m. The rain wasn't just falling, it was drowning the city. The streets were slick, black ribbons reflecting the neon ghosts of traffic lights. I was heading down Route 47, a stretch of road that cuts through the dense woods on the edge of town. No streetlights, just my high beams cutting through the silver curtain of the storm. And then I saw her. She was standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the road. No umbrella, no raincoat, just a thin, pale dress that looked like it was made of mist. I slowed down, my tires hissing against the wet asphalt. As I pulled over, I remember thinking how strange it was that she wasn't shivering. I rolled down the window. The damp chill hit me instantly. "Need a lift?" I asked. She didn't look at me. She just stared straight ahead into the dark woods. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was thin, like paper tearing. "Take me to the old road, near the cemetery." The cold cabin. I clicked the locks. She climbed into the back seat, moving with a strange, fluid grace. She didn't even make the car rock. As she closed the door, the temperature in the cabin didn't just drop, it plummeted. I checked my climate control. I had the heat cranked to 75, but I could see my own breath misting in the air. "A rough night to be out," I said, trying to break the silence. "I'm a talker by nature. It keeps me awake." She didn't answer. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was sitting dead center in the bench seat, staring out the side window. Her skin was a bruised sort of white, and her hair was matted to her forehead. But she wasn't dripping. The seat upholstery under her stayed perfectly dry. "You live out that way?" I tried again. Nothing, just a thump-thump of the wipers. The further we drove toward the cemetery, the heavier the air felt. It was like the car was filling with invisible water. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck, that primal instinct that tells you you're being hunted. I looked in the mirror again. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the green glow of my dashboard lights. She wasn't looking at the scenery. She was looking at something behind us. "Are you all right, miss?" She leaned forward slightly. The smell hit me then. It wasn't the smell of rain. It was the smell of wet earth and old copper. "It's almost home," she said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from a long way off. "I just want to go home." The vanishing. We reached the gates of the old cemetery. The iron bars were slick with moss, shrouded in a fog so thick I could barely see my own hood. "Is here okay?" I asked, slowing the car to a crawl. "I can take you further up the drive if—" A deer, or something like it, bolted across the road. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering against my ribs. The car skidded for a second before gripping the gravel. "Whoa, sorry about that," I exhaled, leaning my head back against the headrest. "Did you see that?" I looked in the rearview mirror to check on her. The back seat was empty. My breath hitched. I turned around completely, reaching over the seat. There was no one. The locks were still down. The child safety locks were engaged. She couldn't have jumped out without me knowing. I scrambled out of the car, shouting into the rain. "Miss! Hey!" I walked around to the passenger side. The door was shut tight. I looked at the window. There was a faint smudge on the glass where her head had been resting, but the seat itself was bone dry. Not a single drop of water, no footprints in the mud, just the sound of the wind howling through the tombstones. I didn't stay. I drove back to the station with my lights on bright, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. The morning after. The next morning, I was sitting in the diner, staring into a cup of black coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. The local news was playing on the TV above the counter. Police have identified the victim of last night's fatal hit-and-run on Route 47. 22-year-old Elena Vance was struck while walking home after her car broke down in the storm. I looked up at the screen. My heart stopped. It was her. The same pale face, the same thin dress. Terrible thing, the waitress sighed, leaning over the counter. Happened right around midnight. They say she died instantly. Poor girl was just trying to get home. I looked down at my hand. It was trembling. I remembered the copper smell in the car. I remembered how cold she was. But then the reporter said something that made the blood turn to ice in my veins. The driver who struck her fled the scene, but investigators found a piece of a shattered headlight. They believe the vehicle was a late-model yellow taxi. I stood up, stumbling toward the door. I ran to my car, parked in the bright morning sun. I walked to the front passenger side and knelt down. The right headlight was shattered. Tucked into the jagged plastic housing was a single wet strand of long, dark hair. I hadn't picked her up to take her home. I had picked her up because I was the one who had sent her there, and she sat in my back seat for 5 miles, staring at the man who killed her, waiting for me to finally see her.
The floor plan was the first thing I memorized. I'm a meticulous person. I like to know exactly where my life fits. The document the landlord gave me showed a standard, if aging, 1-bedroom layout. Kitchen on the left, living area in the center, bedroom at the end of the hall. Simple, clean. But the building, an 1890s brownstone with a history of settling, didn't feel simple. It felt like it was holding its breath. It was my 3rd night in. I was breaking down boxes in the hallway when I saw it. Tucked between the linen closet and the bathroom was a door. It wasn't a full-size door, just a narrow, waist-high wooden panel painted the same cream color as the walls. I checked the floor plan. Nothing. Just a solid line of drywall. Old luggage storage, I muttered to myself, pushing it shut. It clicked into place. That night, I woke up to a sound. It wasn't a bang. It was the soft, rhythmic creak of a hinge. I walked into the hallway, my bare feet cold on the hardwood. The small door was ajar, just a sliver of darkness peering out. I closed it again, harder this time. The next night, it wasn't a creak. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across a floor. Scritch, scritch, scritch. And then the faint, humid sound of a breath being drawn. The threshold. By the end of the week, my curiosity had soured into a cold, knotting anxiety. Every morning, that door was open exactly 3 inches. Every evening, I'd hear the muffled thud of what sounded like footsteps, too heavy for a rat, too light for a person, pacing behind the wood. I grabbed my flashlight and a kitchen knife. I wasn't going to spend another night staring at the ceiling, waiting for the scritch. I knelt before the door. The wood felt unnaturally cold. I pulled it open. I expected a crawl space or a utility pipe. Instead, the beam of my light stretched into a narrow, impossibly deep room. It shouldn't have fit within the dimensions of the building. The air that hit me was stagnant, smelling of wet copper and ancient sun-baked dust. I crawled inside. The walls were covered in a floral wallpaper so old it had turned a bruised shade of purple, peeling back in long necrotic strips. There was a single high-backed velvet chair in the corner, its stuffing erupting like a tumor. This room didn't belong to the 21st century. It felt like a pocket of 1920, trapped in amber. The evidence. As I moved deeper, my flashlight caught the marks on the walls. At first, I thought they were scratches from a dog, but as I leaned in, I realized they were tallies. Hundreds of them, carved deep into the lath and plaster with something sharp. Then I saw the table. It was a small, circular pedestal table covered in dozens of loose, curled photographs. My heart began to drum against my ribs. I picked one up. It was a black and white shot of a woman standing in the building's lobby, her face blurred as if she were vibrating. I flipped through others, people in old-fashioned coats, children playing in the street, all of them looking haunted, unaware of the lens. But then, the black and white turned to color. My breath hitched. I found a photo of the previous tenant, a man I'd seen in the building's directory. He was sleeping in his bed. The angle was high, looking down from the ceiling. Then I reached the bottom of the pile. The photo on top was glossy, new. It was a picture of me sitting at my kitchen table 2 nights ago. But the angle was impossible. It wasn't taken from a window or the doorway. It was taken from inside the refrigerator. The next photo was of me in the shower, the steam blurring the edges. The last photo was taken from behind me, right now, in this very room. The twist. I froze. The beam of my flashlight began to tremble. In the photograph, I could see the back of my own head, the glow of my light hitting the wall, and a hand, a long, gray, spindly hand reaching out from the shadows just inches above my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. But then, the small door at the end of the narrow room, the only way out, slowly began to swing shut. As the light from the hallway narrowed to a thin line, I heard it, a soft, wet whisper right against my shell of an ear. It didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like a neighbor who had lived with me for a lifetime. "You weren't supposed to find the dark room," the voice rasped. I wasn't finished with the album. The door clicked shut, and in the absolute darkness, I heard the scritch of a match being struck.
The floorboards in my childhood home didn't just creak, they groaned, like the house was settling its weight onto old, brittle bones. It was a Victorian-style build in the Pacific Northwest, gray wood, drafty windows, and a bedroom that felt 3 degrees colder than the rest of the hallway. But the cold wasn't the problem. The closet was. The weight of a stare. I remember being 6 years old, paralyzed under a heavy wool blanket, staring at that slatted wooden door. It was one of those tall, narrow closets that disappeared into the ceiling. My parents always told me it was just settling, but I knew the difference between a house shifting and the rhythmic, deliberate sound of a door unlatching. Every night I'd make a ritual of it. I would lean my entire body weight against that door until I heard the click of the metal tongue meeting the strike plate. I'd check it 3 times. Yet every night around 2 a.m., I'd wake up to a sliver of darkness. The door would be open just an inch, not swung wide. That would have been too obvious. It was more surgical, just enough for a single eye to find the gap. I could feel the gaze. It was heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to draw full breath. Sometimes, if the house was quiet enough, I'd hear it. Not a growl, not a monster's hiss, just breathing. A slow, wet human wheeze that sounded like someone was trying very hard to be silent and failing. The scratching. As I hit my teenage years, the fear didn't leave. It just curdled into a dull, constant anxiety. I stopped telling my parents. They'd already spent a fortune on a child psychologist who told me I had an overactive imagination triggered by night terrors. But night terrors don't leave physical marks. One Tuesday in October, I found the first one. I was reaching for a hoodie when I saw it on the interior of the door, at eye level. A series of thin, vertical grooves in the wood. They looked like they had been made by fingernails or something harder. I told myself I'd done it in my sleep. I told myself it was the dry wood splintering. I told myself anything to avoid looking into the back of that closet where the winter coats hung like empty husks of people. The night I stopped running. The breaking point came last summer. I'm 24 now, and I had returned to that house to help my mother pack after my father passed. Being back in that room felt like stepping into a cold grave. The closet was still there, the paint peeling in long, sickly strips. The first night back, I heard the click. Click. The door drifted open. The familiar wheeze started up again, louder than it had been 15 years ago. It sounded older, more desperate. I didn't hide under the covers this time. Grief and exhaustion had burned away my cowardice. I grabbed a heavy mag light from the nightstand, lunged out of bed, and ripped the closet door open so hard it nearly hit the wall. "Enough!" I screamed. The beam of the flashlight cut through the darkness. I expected, a squatter, a ghost, a rational explanation. Instead, I found my clothes, my old board games, a stack of dusty moving boxes. The closet was shallow, maybe 4 feet deep. There was nowhere to hide. I tore through the coats, tossing them onto the floor. I shoved the boxes aside, desperate to find a crawl space or a trick panel. Nothing, just the smell of mothballs and old cedar. The discovery. I was about to turn away, feeling like a fool, when I noticed something wedged in the gap between the baseboard and the back wall. It was a small, rectangular slip of paper. I pulled it out. It was a Polaroid photograph. My heart didn't just skip a beat, it seemed to stop entirely. The photo showed my bedroom. The angle was perfect. It was taken from inside the closet, looking out toward the bed. In the foreground of the shot, a man was partially visible, huddled between my suits. His skin was the color of wet parchment. He was looking directly into the lens with a wide, toothy grin that looked like it hurt to maintain. My hands started to shake. I looked at the bed in the photo. My childhood quilt was on it. But then I looked closer at the bedside table in the picture. There was a glass of water and a bottle of my father's heart medication. My father only started taking that medication 6 months ago. The photo wasn't an old relic of a previous tenant. The quality was crisp. The lighting was modern. It had been taken recently, very recently. The quiet truth. I dropped the photo as a sudden horrific realization washed over me. The closet was shallow, yes, but I remembered the house's blueprints from the estate sale. There was a dead space, a 3-foot gap between my closet wall and the chimney flue that wasn't accounted for in the room's dimensions. I leaned my ear against the back wall of the closet. Wheeze, wheeze. It wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside the wall. Then I heard a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. From behind the wood, just inches from my face, came a soft, rhythmic scratching. Scratch, scratch, scratch. And then a voice, thin, papery and dry as dust, whispered through the cracks. "You forgot to lock it tonight, Ben." I didn't stay to pack. I didn't even grab my keys. I ran. I'm writing this from a motel 3 towns over, but I haven't slept. Because as I sit here, looking at the closet door in this motel room, I realize I didn't hear a door close behind me, and I can't shake the feeling that the weight of that stare didn't stay in the house.
The fluorescent lights of the accounting firm hummed with a low, predatory vibration. It was 11:42 p.m. I was the last soul in the building, a glass and steel monolith that felt less like an office and more like a cage once the sun dipped below the horizon. I grabbed my coat, the static of the carpet snapping against my fingertips, and stepped into the hallway. The building was simple, 12 floors of corporate beige, no 13. Some said it was superstition. The architect just skipped the number.
I pressed the call button. The elevator arrived with a heavy mechanical thud that echoed too long in the empty lobby. The button. I stepped inside. The elevator was lined with mirrored brass, reflecting my tired face back at me a dozen times. I reached for the L for lobby, but my hand froze. There, nestled just above the 12, where there should have been nothing but a blank metal plate, was a button. It was older than the others, circular and encased in a dull, tarnished bronze. The number 13 was etched into it, the groove filled with something dark and dried. My brain stalled. I'd worked here for 3 years. I knew every inch of this keypad. But curiosity is a persistent itch. I thought of a storage room, or maybe a private penthouse I'd never been told about. I pressed it. The button didn't click. It sank into the panel like it was being swallowed by something soft. The elevator didn't move immediately. There was a long, agonizing groan of cables, sound like a giant intake of breath, and then we began to rise. The floor of dust and echoes. The ascent was slow, too slow. I watched the digital display. 10, 11, 12. The red light flickered. A horizontal line appeared. Then the number 13 glowed with a sickly, bruised purple light. The doors didn't slide open. They retreated into the walls with a screech of rusted metal. I was met with a wall of cold air that smelled of wet copper and old, forgotten paper. The hallway beyond was a graveyard of office supplies. Desks were overturned, their skeletal frames reaching toward a ceiling where tiles hung like loose teeth. The lights didn't hum here. They flickered in a rhythmic heartbeat-like stutter. Flash, an empty corridor. Darkness. Flash, a water cooler filled with black, stagnant liquid. Darkness. I stepped out. I shouldn't have, but the silence was hypnotic. Every footstep on the thick carpet felt muffled, as if the floor were trying to pull my shoes in. "Hello?" I whispered. The word didn't echo. It died the moment it left my lips, absorbed by the shadows. I walked 20 feet in, my phone's flashlight cutting a pathetic path through the gloom. That's when I saw the files, thousands of them strewn across the floor. I looked down at one. It was a personnel file. The photo was a man, but his face had been meticulously scratched out with a needle. I looked at the name. It was mine. The Thing in the Dark. A sound started then. It wasn't a scream or a floorboard creaking. It was the sound of wet fabric being dragged over glass. Schlick, schlick, schlick. It was coming from the end of the hall, where the shadows seemed to be thicker, more solid. I aimed my light. The beam hit a corner, and for a split second, I saw a shape. It was tall, too tall for the ceiling, and its limbs moved with the jerky, unnatural motion of a broken marionette. It didn't have a face, just a smooth, pale surface where features should be, tilted curiously to the side. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I bolted. My dress shoes skidded on the scattered papers. Behind me, the dragging sound accelerated. Schlick, schlick, schlick. It wasn't running. It was folding space, appearing closer with every flicker of the dying overhead lights. I reached the elevator and slammed my fist against the L button. The doors groaned. Come on, come on. The thing was 10 feet away now. In the strobe light effect of the hallway, I saw it reach out a hand, if you could call it that. It had too many knuckles, and the skin looked like translucent parchment. The doors hissed shut, just as a gray fingertip brushed the brass. The descent. The elevator plummeted. My stomach lurched into my throat. The display didn't show numbers anymore, just symbols, strange, jagged runes that burned my eyes to look at. I collapsed in the corner, staring at the closed doors, waiting for them to be torn open. But the elevator stopped with a gentle, polite Ding! The doors opened to the main lobby. Warm yellow light, the smell of floor wax. The night security guard, Elias, was sitting at the desk, sipping coffee and watching a muted baseball game. I stumbled out, drenched in sweat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I gripped the edge of his desk. "Elias," I wheezed. "The 13th floor. There's something up there. I went to 13. Elias looked at me, his expression shifting from boredom to deep, genuine concern. He put his coffee down slowly. "Son, you look like you've seen a ghost. But what are you talking about? 13? This building is a standard construction. It's 12 floors. Always has been. The elevator doesn't even have a track for a 13th level." "I saw it," I screamed, pointing toward the elevators. "The button, it's right there above the 12. Elias stood up, sighing, and walked with me to the car I had just exited. He gestured to the panel. "Look for yourself." I stared. The panel was pristine, smooth, brushed steel. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. There was no bronze button, no 13, just a blank space where I had pressed my thumb minutes ago. "You've been working too hard," Elias said, patting my shoulder. "Go home, get some sleep." The twist. I nodded, feeling the edges of my sanity fraying. Maybe he was right. Stress does strange things to the mind. I walked across the lobby toward the heavy glass exit doors. My hand reached for the handle, but I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the door. In the reflection, Elias was still standing by the elevator, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor where I had stood. And in the reflection, I wasn't wearing my coat. I looked down at my own body. I was wearing my coat, but in the glass, the man staring back at me was the man from the file upstairs, the one with his face scratched out. Then I heard a sound from the elevator behind me. Ding! The doors opened again, even though no one was there. I turned around. Elias was gone. The lobby was empty. I looked at the elevator panel one last time from across the room. The L button wasn't lit. The 1 wasn't lit. The light was coming from a button that shouldn't have existed. It was glowing a bruised, sickly purple light. And as I watched, the digital display above the door began to count. 14, 15, 16. The building was only 12 stories high, but I wasn't in the building anymore. I was in the space between. Behind me, the glass doors didn't lead to the street. They led to a hallway of overturned desks and flickering lights. And the dragging sound, it was right behind my ear.